There are games that are amazing when it was released, but got lost in a lot of people's discussion as time went on as newer games got released. Somehow, NieR Automata is not one of those games. No matter what I do in my particular timeline, that game is always brought up at least once every day. It could be in many forms. It could be through a mention by name, it could be through its characters, it could be through the fan arts, which are so freaking many of them at this point. It has certainly turned into, in my opinion, one of the most culturally impactful games in the last decade, or at least on the weeb sphere, where you normies are probably talking about Fortnite all day. NieR Automata is something I'm quite interested in as well back in last year, and when I played it and beat it back then, I was blown away. That game is just every bit as amazing as a lot of people say. Gameplay is a bit of a mixed bag, but I absolutely adore the characters. I adore the story. I adore the themes that are being discussed and presented in the game, even if they were a bit rough in a lot of the aspects. I enjoyed the graphics and the environment. The PC port was quite wonky, and it's still wonky even right now, but then again, so was my PC at the time. But those are my opinions that I held at the time. I'd even dare to say that NieR Automata is my personal best game of 2017, beating Persona 5, and I'm a huge Persona fan. It's 2020 now, and I don't really have a lot of games to play, so I might as well spend some time in this one and ask myself once again, why is this game so memorable? Why is this game still so culturally significant, or at least among the discussions of Japanese games? In this video, I'm going to replay NieR Automata once again, just to remind myself why this game is so culturally impactful even after years and years to come. So let's talk about NieR Automata, a game that is still persistently memorable in quite a lot of people's memories even to this day, even starring in other games. A game about robots and androids that are more human than at least 90% of AAA games these days.
We're soldiers. We take pride in our service.
NieR Automata is technically part of a video game series, but I don't have previous gen consoles, and therefore I can't really talk about the previous NieR game or games before this, and especially the Drakengard series that precede them. Drakengard? I'm mostly gonna be talking about NieR Automata on its own merits, completely detached from the previous games in the series, because that's how the game treats itself. It's a standalone experience in the distant future. So I'm speaking to this video as a fan of NieR Automata, and not a fan of the series that it was somewhat involved in as a whole. So if there are things that I'm talking about or speculating and can be explained through the previous games, I apologize in advance for not being aware of it. Now before we get to the game itself, I want to get to the biggest elephant in the room, and that is the PC version. The PC version of the game is at the very least below average. You can try to run the game out of the box and still somewhat work, but you really need a decent PC to do so. And even if you have a decent PC, there are still a couple of essential mods that you need to download. You need to apply the Fixed Automata Resolution mod as the absolute essential mod that you need to make sure that the game runs on its proper 1080p resolution. Because guess what? The game doesn't run at 1080p, it runs at 900p, or at least that's what NVIDIA Shadowplay's resolution tells me. That is until you run the game on borderless windowed, which will run the game at 1080p. Very strange. And the way to get it to borderless windowed is also very strange. Basically, when you play the game, you have to press Alt-Enter twice, so it goes to full screen first and then finally borderless. Weird. You need to get inside the Fixed Automata Resolution control panel by pressing Ctrl-Shift backspace and configure the global illumination to at least high so that you can get good performance. Not only that, but you also need to configure the resolution of the bloom and the ambient occlusion to its native resolution rather than a fixed one. But even far is not enough. There are also texture packs, LOD fixes, new video resolutions, a lot of really essential things to make your PC NieR Automata experience actually actually feels like a PC experience. Unfortunately, out of the box, the game is not ready for a proper PC experience. So no matter what happens, you're gonna have to tweak and mod the game so that the game can be at the very least running decently, because the game does need plenty of things to make it run well. Now let's talk about the proper game itself. NieR Automata takes place in a very far future. In 5012 AD, aliens invade the Earth, wipe out a significant portion of humanity, and the rest who survives take refuge on the moon. About 192 years later, humanity developed forces of humanoid android units named Yorha to counterattack against the invaders in a proxy war, but their attempts have not been successful. The game takes the perspective of the Yorha unit number 2 Type B, also known as 2B, or at least at first, before you play as other android units. The intro begins with 2B narrating about the cycle of life and death that they seem to be perpetually trapped on, and her desire in killing the gods who gave that curse. Alongside other android units, they are tasked on a Goliath-class unit that was causing trouble on Earth. But during the travel, the units got wiped out one by one, until only 2B is left. Thankfully, the support 9S came in just in time to help. Can they take down the Goliath-class unit? Can they salvage whatever left of humanity? What kind of sacrifices that they're going to make in order to achieve balance on this truly wretched world that God has forsaken them in? Where to even begin talking about NieR Automata? I suppose we should just start off by talking about the weak points. And despite NieR Automata being an amazing game of that year, in my opinion, I don't think it's the kind of game that can steal my favorite game of all time spot. The gameplay of Automata is quite wonky and not something I want to come back to if you ask me. You have your typical hack and slash combat, you have your shooting gallery and bullet hell combat, you have the hacking minigames which are also bullet hell combat. None of these things reach a level that I would consider good. At the very best, they're fine and perfectly functional. At worst, it's a disjointed mess that is so disorganized that you'll end up button mashing your way through without knowing what button does what. It's more of a spectacle fighter, and that's what Platinum games are known for, but it's not as well refined as a lot of other spectacle fighters that Platinum makes. Even Astral Chain is more refined mechanically than this. Thankfully, this is an action RPG, so it's a lot less menu driven and tedious as your typical turn-based RPG, but it's still one that demands quite a lot of buttons to be pressed to do a lot of actions for the most effective result. It's also a game that is not very good at explaining its mechanics. Did you know that the game has a finishing move, one that only rarely appears to enemies, that only rarely gets taken down? Some of you might not even know that repeatedly turning the pod lights on and off is a way to taunt the enemies and cause them to literally blow off steam, which will increase their damage input and output and can be further upgraded with the swappable plug-in chips later on. Some of you might not know about this really handy platforming maneuver in which you can use your pod to traverse even further away, which I discovered by accident. So like a lot of JRPGs that rely so much on storytelling and characters, I recommend tweaking the difficulty down to either easy or normal. Not because the game is really challenging, but because in order to achieve maximum efficiency in the combat, it requires you to press and hold quite a lot of buttons, and that will get super tiresome in harder difficulties, unless you have spider hands. That and the easier difficulties do make the prospect of destroying hundreds of robots quite fun and satisfying. But even on the easy difficulty, the game took this brilliant idea straight out of Xenoblade Chronicles and throw high-level bullet sponge level 50 enemies in a side quest that you can accept at around level 20. And while I have no issues in defeating those enemies, it does take a long time and my hands were twisting and cramping like my granddad sensei in the retirement home. How about letting me know that the following quest is meant for a later time at higher levels? Or better yet, don't let me accept quests that will sure as hell get my existence wiped clean. So in terms of gameplay, I really hate to say that NieR Automata's gameplay left me unimpressed, disjointed, and tired. Thankfully, NieR Automata isn't all about the gameplay, because otherwise it'd be a game that is not on my best of 27 list, and a game that ends right next to the colossal meh that was Mass Effect Andromeda and... wait, what was that game again? So let's talk about the things that I love about NieR Automata, and now is the good time to ask the question, Where do I start? A lot of people would probably start off talking about NieR Automata in the kind of deep and provocative themes that the game tackles, such as existentialism and your purpose in the grand scheme of things. After all, you wouldn't really name your character 2B if you're not gonna make a 2B or not to be statement somewhere along the line. But that's not why I love NieR Automata. What I love about NieR Automata is the level of emotional engagement and subsequently torment that it gives to me, as the game, the characters, and everything surrounding its universe progressively descends into absolute madness. A lot of it began just from the game's opening line and about how everything that lives is designed to end. The narration was provided by 2B, and while it can mean something entirely spoiler related to the cycle of life and death, I don't think the curse isn't just the fact that they're living in a perpetual cycle of life and death, or that she's constantly witnessing the cycle of life and death. I think the curse is the fact that she and a lot of these androids and machines are aware that they are living in it. As you get through the game, you will see the machines and the androids have pretty much gained sentience. 2B says that emotions are prohibited, mostly due to her trying her hardest to not get attached to 9S for spoiler reasons, but the intro paints it as if it's a standard Yorha android protocol to not have emotions. Whether or not it's humanity's intentions for these androids to have a soul, they do have a soul. They not only have the ability to talk, express emotions, form relationships, join a cult to become gods, but they can also do that. I think this is one of the ways for the gods to signify that the next generation of species are actually not made out of biological matter. The next generation of species are made with metal and heavy machinery. They're only made to vaguely look like human beings, so that we as human beings witnessing the events of this desolate future can find someone or something to relate to. After all, how can we form emotional connections to heavy machinery that doesn't really have a face and can only respond in monotonous voices?
Brother, please start moving. Brother.
Don't worry people, there are quite a lot of that in this game. What I love about NieR Automata is that it's a game that stars almost little to no human beings, and yet it shows more humanity than the other game about androids and their humanity. Human beings have contemplated the purpose of their existence for a long time throughout their life. So that sort of discussion is nothing new to us. We have always questioned whether or not we're important in the grand scheme of things, and whether or not we're gonna be remembered by people or forgotten and be left to dust. However, the concept of existence and contemplating the reasoning and the purpose of why you're living in this world is something that none of the robots or even the androids have a full grasp on. You can say that they're there to fulfill a specific goal, but they have since gained sentience or a soul from the great gods above, which makes them to question if the goal that they're assigned to is something that they should do. The game allows us, human beings, to see these robots slowly grasping the concept of their purpose in life and questioning the very reason that they exist in their perspective, as in artificially created life forms that are either not meant to have a soul or are programmed to have a soul. Either way, this is something that is new to them, and in some ways, this is the next step on Earth's inhabitants. However, since they are not biological matters, they don't really grow up per se, a concept that the robots in the jungle learned the hard way without spoiling too much. That is, unless if you can find a way to transfer the souls or the memories of these robots into a more human body, like Curry from Fallout 4 or 9S in general, of whose further explanation only leads to spoiler territory. The humanity within the robots and the androids is one of the elements of NieR that I find very interesting, but also heartbreaking as well. There are many stories of androids and robots that do their hardest in trying to survive the wilderness, and yet they're unable to do so because they lack the comprehension or the intelligence necessary to figure out how to survive as human beings do. It also makes the side quests very interesting because we're seeing in many different ways how the robots evolve to mimic the behaviors of human beings. In fact, the side quests, or at least the side quests in the first half of the game, really helps in enhancing the experience and expanding upon the world and the robots' capabilities to the point where I'd say that it's pretty much essential for you to play through most of them. But of course, this video game can't always focus on all of the robots, so the game decides to focus on three central characters, 2B and 9S, quests are introduced very early on, while A2 is introduced later. All 3 characters are playable depending on which portion of the game you play, and yes, you're gonna have to keep on playing to get at least 5 endings so that you can truly complete the experience. That being said, game, I prefer if you give a trailer to the next route in the same way that you do for ending C, D, and E, rather than have Square Enix Senpai to tell you, hey, did you know that there's an ending B that you can get out of the many endings this game has? Let's start off with 2B. 2B is a Yorha android battle unit that has your typical no-nonsense stoic personality, whose fame on the internet is more exaggerated thanks to her character design rather than her personality, which is essentially my opinion on Lightning from Final Fantasy XIII. Of course, 2B's name is based on a very famous "to be or not to be" quote. It's to signify not just her purpose in life, but also the purpose of androids and machines in general. Why do they exist? What purpose do they serve in the grand scheme of things? Do they have to be, or do they not have to be? Little do they know that they serve quite a purpose, and little does she know that she serves a very significant spoiler-ish purpose. 9S, on the other hand, is a cheerful and lighthearted scanner unit. He's basically the heart of the entire game, being one of the very few androids who are willing to crack a few jokes and not be so serious all the time, which actually annoys quite a lot of people around him. 9S's name is actually the opposite of 2B. 9S is a Latin pun of non-S, which means not to be. It can also be interpreted as a reference to the Ninus tomb, which is a location that the story of Pyramus and Thisbe is based in, a story involving 2 lovers who are in the deadliest misunderstanding known to fiction, and whose story serves as a foreshadowing to 9S's ultimate driving motivation. And then there's A2. A2 is basically 2B mixed with nihilism. Known for being a deserter of Yorha because the commanders have betrayed them, A2 went to her own journey, wandering around the scorched earth. A2's name is a lot easier to determine, but you might not think about that at first. A2 is introduced later on as a person who betrays Yorha. Betrayal? A2 Brute? Only slightly more on the nose than that character from Persona 5 who is named after an infamous figure on the Sengoku period that is well known for betrayal. Now, throughout most of the first half, you only get to the story through the perspective of 2B and 9S. There are 2 routes that you need to get through, and you're gonna need to finish that first half twice. The first one as 2B, and the second one as 9S. Playing as 2B is a lot more straightforward in terms of storytelling, because we're merely seeing the world through the perspective of a battle unit. But playing as 9S is where we get to see the world in more detail, having not just the scanner ability, but also the hacking ability that lets you to unlock crates and brief hallucinations about the world. 2B's route, or ending A, is for us to familiarize with the universe, whereas 9S's route is for us to expand upon the universe even more and revealing story details that weren't previously apparent. The contrast between 2B's stoic and no-nonsense attitude with 9S's more cheerful and easygoing attitude is a tune that is played almost a million times as the story progresses, but I still really like their dynamic and how each and every quest slowly evolves them and their reliance on each other together. Their relationship becomes the main foundation of the game's overall story, which is precisely why I was a little disappointed that the main story rather underdevelops them. It's only thanks to the side quests that you're gonna be able to see their interactions more, such as a side quest where you see 2B being visibly jealous at 9S for trying to help a girl. So playing the side quests are absolutely essential in my opinion, especially when the game is not really that long when you only play the main quests anyway. After you get through the game with ending A and B, the game continues into other endings, which are ending C, D, and E, where the story escalates into depressing territories. The second half of the game is where we have major characters being axed off, and 9S, the cheerful, lighthearted character, slowly but surely going absolute bonkers. The route is primarily centered more on 9S and A2, but 2B still plays a huge role within them, being the primary driving motivation in why they do what they do. Thanks to the game making you feel familiar with the characters and the universe in the first half, it does feel gut-wrenching when you see these characters suffering and getting axed off in the second half. As I said before, what completely drew me into NieR Automata is the fact that I am emotionally engaged with the overall plot of the game. I want to see what happens with the characters by the end. I want to see where the journey leads them. I want to see what kind of revelation that they're going to find out about humanity, the world around them, and what they're going to do with that information. The story wouldn't have been interesting if it takes place on the perspective of a human being. We're looking at the story through the perspective of androids who are not only gaining conscience and emotions, but also trying to figure out the world around them and how they work. However, despite all of my praise on the game's emotional engagement, the actual plot of the game itself wasn't really anything special. I can even dare to say that there are some aspects that leave me more confused instead of impressed, but the confusion is not something that makes me angry. It's something that makes me want to learn more about the game's universe because I'm so invested with the characters. I think it's how the game characterizes them with very simple and easy to digest personalities that make them so easily relatable and their emotional moments to be more impactful later on, and NieR, in my opinion, certainly did a good job on that. So in conclusion, looking back at the games that I played in 2017, NieR Automata is, in my opinion, one of the best in terms of emotional engagement, while Persona 5 is a game that I have replayed a couple of times thanks to the gameplay being a significant improvement over the previous entry. It's NieR Automata's story that emotionally engages me more, and there aren't even a lot of human beings in the story, with a unique post-apocalyptic setting and the story taking place primarily through the perspective of androids learning what it means to be human. NieR Automata provides a stunningly unique, emotional, and also depressing experience that managed to struck me down my core. The big question right now is, should you play NieR Automata? Honestly, if you're looking for an action RPG with stellar gameplay, NieR can't really impress you that much. The combat and shooting gameplay are functional at its best, and not something that I want to go back and replay again if you ask me. However, the story is something that you should at least experience once, and by experience, I mean experience it fully, and not just stopping on ending A and saying that you're done with it like a lot of people sadly. Should you buy the game at full price? Nope. As much as I love this game, it is quite difficult to recommend to people, especially when they can't get their expectations right. They might get into the game for the story or for the gameplay, but regardless of what you seek in the game, I recommend getting the game on a discount. Thankfully, most online retailers sell the game at $40, and that, in my opinion, is the perfect price for this game. If the price is less, the game should at least be in your library, even if you're not that interested in playing it now. If the price is more, I recommend buying something else, like a Dakimakura or something.